position vis-à-vis the EU. Now, to what extent, we know that Europe is still in the grip of financial crisis and economic stagnation. Now, to what extent do you think that Britain is leaving what it sees a sinking ship in the EU?
I think the skepticism that you can see in the UK vis-à-vis Brussels goes much deeper than the current crisis. That has built up over a generation almost of skeptical discourse in the UK on, whether we should be part of this entire thing, whether Brussels is too overbearing. But of course the financial crisis and the economic crisis that has followed suit have aggravated that and have made it easier for those who argue against the EU, to make their case and see, look at that dysfunctional, corrosive system that doesn't really create economic stability and not even political stability. And so I would say that, there is an underlying fundamental reason that goes a bit deeper, but certainly the crisis hasn't made it much easier. Whether it's a leaving the sinking ship kind of sentiment, I think it probably goes a bit too far. Remember that the UK has just gotten itself out of a double-dip recession, is now looking economically strong, but not a long time ago was, in economic hardship as well, and so, the question of who's economically strong and weak is a very, very relative one at all times.
In case there's a Brexit, that is Britain leaving the EU, what would be the impact of such an action on Britain itself?
On Britain itself, I mean, there are some projections according to which Britain could lose a significant chunk of its economic growth, of its economic size, over time, mostly because of, the lack of access to the single market at the same conditions that exists now. And that's the economic impact is one thing that most people kind of obsess about. But there are other aspects as well. Britain's influence over European affairs, in which it is fundamentally interested, whether it's in the EU or not, would of course diminish, would be much smaller. Its influence over policies, that the French and the Germans and others adopt. Its influence on foreign policy would diminish. Britain's influence is now, as opposed to what people sometimes think over there, not that of a fundamentally great power anymore. Much of its power comes from the fact that it is associated with the EU, plays a major role, and is part of the institutional setup, and can take these allies in and form a group in which to act together. That would go away. The United States has very clearly stated that its special relationship with the United Kingdom, to a certain extent, depends on the UK being in the EU, because it needs the UK as, a way to leverage the EU also, and once that is gone, a part of the special relationship will kind of wilt away, and you could go on the list. Generally, I would say that the overall political and economic influence of Britain, despite its strong role with the City of London, would be diminished, and that's neither good for Europe nor for the UK.
Very quickly, what would it mean for the EU if Britain leaves?
For the EU, it would primarily, mean two things. First of all, a liberal, open market, open-minded, outward-looking kind of force inside the EU would be disappearing, which would be bad for the discussions inside the EU on all kinds of policies, from economics to immigration and integration to enlargement to, you mentioned it. And the second thing is that, one of the biggest foreign policy players in Europe would all of a sudden not be part of the equation anymore. And when you do crisis management in Ukraine, do crisis management in the Mediterranean and Northern Africa and elsewhere, you want all powers on board. With the UK standing outside, it would diminish the UK's influence, but also significantly the EU's influence.
Jan Terschel, thank you very much.